Good afternoon, I'm Tamara Dorrington and you're listening to an audio podcast for Responsible Traveller on Digital Nomad.
It's travelling.
It's exploring.
It's discovering.
It's Digital Nomad.
And for those of you who are new to this podcast, we've been speaking recently about international volunteering options for travellers seeking new experiences abroad. Specifically, we've spoken about the ins and outs of volunteering from the point of view of the traveller. Now I thought it might be useful to get the inside scoop from the volunteer organisations themselves. Joining us over the phone is the volunteer director for one such organisation. All the way in Siem Reap, Cambodia, we're speaking now with Mr. Ron Carter. Good afternoon, Ron. Thank you for agreeing to this interview today.
Hello, Tamara. No, it's a pleasure. I'm happy to help out.
Excellent. Now, Ron, I understand you're the volunteer coordinator with a community development program called New Hope in Cambodia. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about this organisation?
Okay. Well, New Hope was founded a little under 5 years ago by a Khmer whose name is Kem Shaw. Kem Shaw was born at the end of the Pol Pot era and grew up. In 1980, I think there were 6 doctors and about 22 teachers left in Cambodia. So a whole generation of Khmers have had no education. Kem Shaw grew up in this time, and as a child, he used to collect rubbish for recycling, and that was the only way they could feed the family. But as he grew up, he was obviously an intelligent guy, and when he was 14, he found a missionary school. And in 3 hours every morning, between 4 o'clock in the morning and 7, he learned 3 languages, Japanese, Thai, and English. He worked hard. He wanted to be a tuk-tuk driver. He worked for 6 years, saved enough money, bought his first tuk-tuk. By the time he was 24, he owned 4 tuk-tuks and employed 3 drivers. At that point, he met his current wife, Sri Mom, and got married, and they moved out to Mundabai, where New Hope is now located. Mundabai is one of the very poorest slum areas in Siem Reap and probably Cambodia. When he got out here, he was horrified to find that the kids didn't go to school. There were no schools. The families were poor. They sent the kids off to collect rubbish, the same as he'd done when he was a kid. So Kem Shaw is a very compassionate man, and he wanted to give the kids the same opportunity the missionary school had given him. So he started a small school with 30 kids under a little grass hut, employed a part-time teacher, paid for out of his tuk-tuk earnings, and spent some time teaching himself. After about 8 months, an Australian woman, Kerry, was volunteering in Cambodia and came across Kem Shaw. She ended up spending about 7 weeks with Kem Shaw, went back to Australia and kept thinking about what he was trying to do, and sold up and moved back here about 4.5 years ago, and said to Kem Shaw, look, if we're going to do this, we've got to do it properly. So Kem Shaw is so passionate about helping his people, he ended up sending all of his tuk-tuks, even though he was married now and got a baby on the way, sold his tuk-tuks and put the money into what was the old New Hope school. And up to about 2 years ago, we had about 520 kids enrolled at the school. We had a small medical centre just in one room. We had an Australian nurse here that was helping. And that's really how New Hope got started. The problem New Hope had, was that parents were reluctant to send the kids to school because they needed the kids to collect rubbish, because there's no social welfare system here. Mm-hmm. If you don't earn money, you don't eat, you starve, as simple as that. So the kids out collecting rubbish, the parents didn't want them going to school because then they couldn't eat. So New Hope implemented about 4 years ago a sponsorship program. So the deal was that we'd find sponsors for the family's food needs, provided the kids went to school. That was the condition. And that's really how New Hope got going. And of course, it's grown substantially since then.
Excellent. And after its foundation, when exactly did you get involved in New Hope?
2 years ago, 2 years in April, so just a little over 2 years now. A friend of my son-in-law's brother had been backpacking in Southeast Asia, and somebody had told him about New Hope, and he spent, I think, 8 weeks here. And 2 or 3 Christmases ago, he told me, we were at my daughter's house, and he told me about his experiences in New Hope, and I think, sort of most people at some point in their lives have wanted to do some volunteer work, and the timing was right for me, so I decided to come for 10 weeks, and I just fell in love with the place, and I fell in love with what New Hope were trying to achieve, and I've been here ever since.
And you stayed on as the volunteer coordinator?
Yeah, well, when I came to New Hope, we didn't have a volunteer program. I actually came through an English charity global tier. I paid, I think, $2,200 to come for 10 weeks. 600 of that was for accommodation, and they told me that a lot of the money went to the charity that we'd be working with, which was New Hope. But I found out when I was here that only $100 of that money came to New Hope.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of people making money out of volunteers, unfortunately. So my background is actually business development, sales and marketing. So I decided that I was going to stay longer. So I spoke to Kemshaw and Kerry, and we decided to set up our own volunteer program. And that was really my first role outside of teaching in the school, was to set up the volunteer program, which has been hugely successful.
Okay, so I understand there are many different types of volunteer development programs around the world. Can you tell us specifically what are the type of volunteer projects at New Hope?
We have quite diverse projects here. We have a school, so we're always looking for volunteer teachers. They don't have to be qualified teachers because we have a Khmer teacher in every class. We teach English, maths, a bit of geography, world geography, a little bit of world history. We have a curriculum that we follow, so the volunteers are really there to help with vocabulary, pronunciation, with the little kids singing nursery rhymes to feel comfortable with the language. And the more volunteers we have, they can work with smaller groups of children, because some of our classes have, 50, 55 children of different age groups, different learning abilities. So the more volunteers we have, they can work with those smaller groups. On top of the school, we have our medical centre, so we're always desperately looking for volunteer nurses and doctors, particularly doctors. We're very lucky. We do get a lot of nurses come here and volunteer. We've got 4 here at the moment, 1 from Scotland and 3 from Australia. The doctors, sometimes at the moment, we had a doctor here in January, but our next one isn't arriving until August. So always desperate for doctor volunteers here. And apart from the clinic, we have our outreach program. Outreach are basically social workers. So we have teams headed by Khmer staff, and we supplement that with Western volunteers. And they put together the profiles on families that go onto our website looking for sponsors. They spend a lot of time in the villages with the families, meeting families, assessing, their needs. It could be house repairs. They could mean food, medical problems, blankets, mosquito nets, tarpaulins to fix holes in walls and roofs in the wet season. So the need is absolutely endless, and that's what our volunteers get involved with.
Excellent. So really anyone can get involved. Is there an average time that these volunteers usually stay for?
Well, I'd say the average is probably around 3 weeks. So, some we want people here for a minimum of 1 week. Some end up staying for 2 or 3 months. But the average is probably around 3 weeks.
And why is the volunteer program so important to New Hope's success?
Well, for the school for a start. Most of our teachers a lot of our teachers are not properly trained. They've come through New Hope's education department. They've learned their English at New Hope, and then they've come on, they've stayed on to be a teacher. But their English still isn't particularly good. And English is important here because Siem Reap is a tourist town. There is no other industry here. Mm-hmm. So English is the primary language. So to have any hope of getting a job in restaurants, hotels, they need to be able to speak English. So we really need those volunteers with English backgrounds or with a good knowledge of the English language to help teach those kids and help our Khmer teachers learn more. So that's extremely important. Obviously, in the clinic, we treat 400 patients a week. Everything we supply at New Hope is free. We couldn't do that without nurses and because we can't afford to employ qualified nurses and doctors. We rely pretty much on donations. So volunteers are extremely important. We couldn't run the clinic without them. And the same goes for our outreach department. And the other thing, I guess, is our volunteers pay to come here. They pay $400, whether it's for 1 week or 6 weeks. It's a flat $400. Obviously, they have on-ground support. We pick them up from the airport. We book accommodation for them. We look after them while they're here. But really, the bulk of the money comes toward paying Khmer staff salaries. We employ 67 Khmer staff at New Hope. All of these people come from the local community. They would all be unemployed if New Hope wasn't here. And, people are happy to sponsor charities such as New Hope, but they want to sponsor buildings or food programs, kids' education, but nobody wants to sponsor salaries. And without the staff, there'd be no New Hope. So the contribution that the volunteers make with their placement fee is invaluable.
Yes, and many people are surprised at the fee that they have to pay in order to volunteer with an international organisation. But it's good to know that it's going towards positive change in the community. What would you say were the advantages for the volunteers themselves?
I think part of it is creating an awareness of, let's say most of us have grown up in fairly privileged circumstances. So, we see poverty back home, but nothing like you'd see in places like Cambodia and Siem Reap. There's poverty here like you wouldn't believe. And I think basically a lot of people really want to, they know they've enjoyed a lot of privileges. They want to come and see and help. People want to do things. They want to contribute more. And when they come here and see what the conditions are like here, it changes their whole perspective on life. I think in the West we're a very me sort of, we're never happy, always wanting more. And I think when people come here, particularly our younger volunteers, we get 17, 18-year-olds, people in the gap year before uni, and I think, they go back to their country with a whole different perspective. They work harder because they can see how important it is to have an education. And, it's a feel-good thing. I guess people want to be able to do something, want to help in the world. And that's certainly why I guess I've stayed. I have certain skills that are readily available back home, but are just impossible to find here. So it's just rewarding to be able to use some of the things we've learned in a place that desperately needs that sort of help.
Absolutely. And what is the kind of feedback that you've had from past participants in the New Hope volunteer program?
Oh, it's been amazing. To give you an example, I would say that 40 to 50% of our volunteers have come back for a second time. We've had some volunteers back for their fourth and fifth time. We've actually got a nurse from Queensland, from Brisbane here at the moment, so this is her third time here in less than a year. So, I think there's a lot of scepticism in the West about charities and where the money's going. And what you find is that once people have been here and see firsthand, because every penny that comes in a New Hope goes into the community. There is nobody here driving around in flash cars or take a business class or first class air tickets anywhere. Everything that we get coming here goes to the community, whether it's for the food programs, whether it's for our education or employing Khmer staff. And I think once people realise that, they're keen to come back and contribute more. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody complain about their experience here.
Yes, it certainly sounds like a valuable experience for everybody involved. Well, thank you so much, Ron. You've given us a great insight into volunteering opportunities abroad. Do you have any final advice or last-minute comments for people who may be considering a volunteer holiday?
Sure. Look, I think you've got to pick your organisation well, and I know that's difficult because there are a lot of very reputable organisations and there's a lot of shonky ones. I would say research where you're going. You can do that online. You can Google Volunteering Asia, but check with the organisation, talk to them, email them, find out what they're doing, and maybe even speak to them and get them to give you names of past volunteers that you could contact to get feedback from them. We're always happy to do that. But that would be my single biggest concern, is that they end up in an organisation that really is just taking their money. So research where you're going. But believe me, the volunteer experience is wonderful. It's invaluable.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much, Ron. I'll let you get back to your day there at New Hope. I'm sure you're running a very, very tight schedule with all those volunteers.
That's a pleasure. I'm happy to help out.
And that concludes our interview today with Mr. Ron Carter, the Volunteer Director for the New Hope Community Organisation in Cambodia. Thank you for tuning into this audio podcast. I hope it has been informative at the very least. With any luck, it has given you the motivation to go out and seek volunteer opportunities specific to your areas of interest. This is Tamara Dorrington for Responsible Traveller on Digital Nomad. I hope you'll join us again soon.